Sounds good.
How can we say things? How can we use our voices for good? Good morning and welcome to Recipe for Success. As usual, we had a few technical difficulties this morning, so we are coming on a minute or two late. And boy, am I excited to have our guest with us today. She is live coming to you from Turkey. Get that? Just process that one for a minute. So she's so kind. She's joining us from Turkey. Sherry, what time is it there?
It's 8 p.m., so not too bad.
Okay, 8 p.m. It's 10 a.m. for me. So, just a tiny bit of a time difference. And I'm very appreciative of her efforts to join us. I am actually going to read Sherry's bio. As most of you know, that's not something I typically do, but honestly, her accomplishments are so impressive, they deserve to be heard. So, Sherry Rice, CEO and co-founder of Enthea, has helped dozens of startups, nonprofit organizations, academic and research institutions, and small businesses raise funds, operate according to their mission and values, and implement processes that enhance their overall efficiency. Sherry believes in living and working in alignment with purpose and is currently focused on expanding access to psychedelic assisted therapy to alleviate human suffering. So cool. I love that. Okay, get that off my screen. You guys didn't just see that. Before this, Sherry consulted for over 10 years with the United Nations and World Bank, implementing poverty reduction programs at a national level in over 35 countries. Hence, more than likely the reason she's in Turkey. Sherry holds a master's degree in public policy and administration from the London School of Economics and a bachelor's degree in psychology and international development from McGill University. She also completed the certificate in psychedelic therapies and research from CIIS in 2021. In addition to being Enthea's CEO, she's the executive director of Boston Psychedelic Research Group and a strategic advisor for the California Institute of Integral Studies. Okay, I'm tired just reading that, Sherry, and that is a lot of accomplishments in a very short amount of time. So we connected a couple of months ago, and honestly, it was like when I got off the call, I think I bored everybody that I knew because I was constantly telling them about our conversation. I'm like, you're not going to believe the person I just talked to. This was so amazing. So I'm super excited to have you on the show. And clearly you have a background in poverty reduction. So I'm really curious, and I'm sure anybody that's joining us is also curious about what led you from that to this, co-founding a company that specializes in using psychedelics for the treatment of mental health conditions. The floor is yours, my friend.
Thank you so much. And thank you so much for having me as well. I am very excited to be here. In terms of what led me from poverty reduction to the work I'm doing now, I was very focused on working on projects with the overall goal being to reduce poverty. And I did that for a decade in some of the world's most resource-constrained environments. And I was able to see firsthand that while it takes a lot to reduce poverty and it's not a simple solution, I don't believe you can fully eradicate poverty unless you address mental health. And so that's something that I witnessed. And then on top of that, it was just the alarming disparity when it comes to mental health in low-income countries. So, for example, in mid to high-income countries like Canada and the US, about 70% of people with psychosis receive treatment. We wish that would be 100%, but it's 70. But in low-income countries, that figure plummets to 12%. As another example, people with depression, about 23% of people with depression get adequate treatment in high-income countries. That's still not good enough. Like that only 23% of people with depression are getting adequate treatment in high-income countries, and we'll talk about that. But that number goes down to 3% in low-income countries. And then if you look at the effects, and you can cut me off because I can go on about these
No, no,
things.
no. I'm not cutting you off. Go for it, my friend. I love this.
But and then if you then like layer on the factors of like what happens if you go in a place like Sudan or Rwanda or Palestine or Afghanistan or places that have been like ridden with conflict and war, and that list is not exhaustive by any means. You have really high rates of PTSD. So typically in where we live, PTSD rates could be like 10 to 14%, but in countries that have just finished conflict or in conflict, PTSD rates can be like 50 to 70% of the population. And so working and living in those countries for a decade helped me see firsthand that like we need something that works. And in a nutshell, and I'm sure we will get into this in more detail, the way we are currently treating mental health just isn't adequate. We need new approaches, and that's what led me to psychedelic therapy, seeing the potential of these more innovative treatments.
So, you just made a
You
point that
made it.
I'm getting weird feedback. You just made a point that I had never considered before, and that is about the high rates of PTSD in war-torn countries. I don't think the average person even considers that. We think about the actual event, but we don't think about the not only short-term but long-term repercussions to the mental health and how what the trickle down effect of that is. So I think that's a brilliant association that you've made and tied that to the importance of treating it.
Yeah, and if left untreated, that trauma persists. And then now there's studies by people like Rachel Yehuda from Mount Sinai that that trauma actually can be passed on genetically. So we have intergenerational trauma, which is something you see a lot amongst the Jewish community. So you have war, you have conflict, you have horrible things happen. You don't treat the PTSD, and then people pass that PTSD to their children.
Yeah, that is really crazy. Okay, so you have made this very clear connection between low income, war torn countries and mental health conditions and the actual not only acknowledgement but treatment of them. So we're already in countries that don't have that are not rich, that do not have high income standards. I don't imagine they have an overwhelming amount of mental health providers talking to these people or treating them.
That is absolutely correct. They do not. Like the ratio of therapists or social workers to people is, it's already not great in the US, but it's even worse in low income countries. But I want to make sort of a point to say that even in North America or in high income countries, you can see this pattern if you look at unhoused people or homeless populations, um, people that are incarcerated or formerly incarcerated or low income neighborhoods. Like there's this persists even at home. So it's not only, and that's something that, to be honest, I was humbled by. When I learned about the potential benefits of psychedelic therapy, I was so focused on like, we need to do this in war torn countries. We need to do this in low income countries. I'm still very passionate about that, by the way. But I just assumed like everyone at home is fine because I had left home for a decade and just assumed everything was okay, and that is not the case, because even in America, 1 in 5 people are currently suffering from a severe mental health issue at any given moment, like 20% of adults. And in your lifetime, 1 in 2 people in America will suffer from a mental health issue. So this isn't limited to low income countries.
No, no, I completely respect that. I just think that sometimes as Americans specifically, because that's what I happen to be, I think we're
Yeah.
very selfish and we don't look outside of our own borders at problems that may be even amplified in other parts of the world. So that's actually what I think was really enlightening to me. I'm well aware of the mental health problem we have inside of our own country, but if we can develop and we can explore alternatives like what you're doing with the psychedelic treatments, that can be a very effective way to globally treat conditions as well. So
Yeah.
let's talk. Yeah, yeah, go ahead.
And then just to like one more like statistic, because this is kind of my favorite thing. Like the World Health Organization has reported that in some low income countries, just to give this comparison for some of the listeners, you might have 0.05 to zero point 0.1 psychiatrists for every 100,000 people. So I'm not even saying one, I'm saying 0.05 to zero point 0.1 for every 100,000 people. And in high income countries, we have more than 10 for every 100,000 people. So that's the magnitude of difference in terms of just for psychiatrists, for example.
Yeah, it's crazy. Okay, so let's talk about what you do. Let's talk about psychedelics in the treatment of mental health conditions. So I'd like to set the stage by talking about why are you exploring this when there are a million there are a million antidepressants, anti-anxiety, happy pills, whatever we want to call them, on the market today. And most of them are not being prescribed with any level of efficacy or testing to determine what might be the best course of treatment. This is the one I typically prescribe. Let's try that first. So let's set the stage there, moving from the traditional treatment of mental health conditions and symptoms to why something outside of the box makes sense and why we're exploring it.
Well, I think that you helped me answer the question
Tee that
already.
up for you.
So thanks for setting that one up for me, Nancy. The reason why I, yes, there are so many antidepressants, SSRIs, anti-anxiety medications, like different forms of treatment that are out there. But quite frankly, we haven't seen great outcomes from any of them. We've seen the sales of all of these medications go up and up and up and up. And yet we've also seen the rates of suicide and depression and anxiety and loneliness and burnout go up and up and up. So something can't be right if we're prescribing more than we've ever have, and we're prescribing to even younger populations. So now we're prescribing kids like at double the rate that we were, I think, 10 or 15 years ago, prescribing mental health medications. And yet we have, more problems in our youth than we ever have before when it comes to mental health. And that applies to adults as well. So the main reason is we have not seen efficacy. We've been treating people with more or less the same drugs for 50 years. There hasn't been much innovation. There's been some new names and some new brandings and some new, companies in the market, but they're all really prescribing different versions of the same thing. Um, and to kind of quantify what I mean by the inefficiency there, some studies say that antidepressants work well for 15 to 20% of people that take them. Like I mentioned before, like depression is treated adequately for 23% of people with depression in the US. Other studies say that people have a greater than 50% reduction in their depression symptoms 33% of the time with antidepressants. So let's take it like somewhere between 15 and 33% of the time, it's working well. Yet 57% of people that take antidepressants have moderate to severe side effects. First of all, that 30% is not high enough. I don't know any other realm of medicine where we're like, this is only going to work for 30% of you or 20% of you, but 60% of you are going to have pretty bad, awful side effects. Not like a little bit of nausea, but like the constant fatigue or low energy or brain fog or loss of appetite, or sometimes from depression, from antidepressants, you get anxiety. Some studies show that the long-term use of antidepressants can lead to higher risks of suicidal ideation or higher risks of depression or a reduction in brain size. I can go on and on and on. The point is that these treatments are not not working well. And then if you look at talk therapy, so a lot of people have seen this, and there's been a shift in our culture, at least in high income countries. Not so much so in the low income countries. There's, like I said, lack of availability of therapists and some cultural stigmas, but there's been a shift where therapy is promoted. And to be clear, I'm a huge fan of talk therapy. But statistically speaking, talk therapy works well. Again, well meaning like a greater than 50% reduction in symptoms to the point where you might not need to talk to your therapist anymore. It works well for about 50% of people that do it, and only after 15 to 20 sessions. So that still begs the question, Nancy, what about that other 50%? And who can even afford the 15 to 20 sessions? And it seems like we're still not getting the majority of people with mental health issues. And that leads me, sorry again for all the monologues, to the next issue, which is treatment resistance. And what has been documented that depending on the condition, up to 60% of people with a mental health condition are treatment resistant. That just means that like anything that we currently have won't work on them. They've tried one or two things for a significant period of time and it's not producing results. So imagine how hopeless one would feel if they're suffering from anxiety or depression and for years they've tried whatever their doctor has told them. They've tried the therapy, they've tried the antidepressants, they've tried the anti-anxiety medications, and nothing works. So they're in that treatment resistant category. That's where innovative things like ketamine assisted therapy and psychedelic assisted therapy do come in and help. And what the data tells us is that these medicines actually help with people who are treatment resistant. They get to the root cause of one's trauma, they increase neuroplasticity, and depending on the medicine and the protocol, what we've seen from clinical trials is that 65 to 85% of people, when they do these treatments, the psychedelic assisted therapy or ketamine assisted therapy, a year later, they no longer have signs of depression or anxiety or PTSD or eating disorders or addiction after just 1 to 6 sessions. So it's pretty remarkable.
So we're going to dive into that in a second, but I do have a couple of things I want to point out about the first part of your what you were discussing. And that's if we just use an average of 25% of effectiveness across antidepressants, and anxiety medications, that means that 75% of the people that are taking medications are getting no relief. And also 75% of the dollars we are spending in our healthcare system are going toward to pay for medications that are ineffective.
The one, yes, and the asterisks I'll put on that so that the people don't like comment and be like, no, that's wrong. Some comments on that. Yeah, yes, in one way that's true. But it's hard to say that they're getting no relief. They're not getting enough relief. They're not getting enough relief so they can say they're feeling significantly better, or it was a greater than 50% reduction in symptoms, or they're feeling so good they don't have to take their medicine anymore because ultimately isn't that the goal? Like, do I really want to be, if it's my emotions I'm talking about, do I really want to be taking something the rest of my life? And so people may report some relief, but it's not enough relief. And then it comes with a lot of side effects. And so not only are we wasting 75% of the money, going back to your example, we're then spending extra money because you'll see this from analyzing, again, pharmaceutical sales, claims data. People on these antidepressants are often then prescribed 1, 2, or sometimes 3 other medicines to deal with the side effects of that first medicine.
Yeah, very true, and thank you for the clarification on that. And then I also wanted to share a very specific, personal situation. So I have an elderly mother, and I now am going to. I don't know if this phone will stop ringing at me. Who I went to the doctor with her, and we were going through her medications, and she's been taking the same antidepressant at the same level for about 10 years. And I asked the doctor, I said, because she had some side effects that I was pretty sure might be associated with that. And they've been trying to treat these other things without ever looking at maybe we should actually change your medications. And I
Yeah.
asked the doctor, and she's like, I said, when's the last time you reviewed her antidepressants? She's like, we've never reviewed them. She's been on them for 10 years.
I
And
don't want to.
I was just very shocked by
Yeah.
this. It wasn't like she was embarrassed or surprised or anything else. Just like, we've not ever reviewed them. Should we try something else? She literally said to me, do you think we should try something else?
It's
I'm not the doctor, but yes, I think we should try something else.
on this one, I've had a lot of statistics I've been spewing at you. On this one, I do not have a statistic. I'm going to make a point to look it up after this talk. But intuitively, I feel, or anecdotally from like hearing your story and others, that we may have a serious problem with the over prescribing of mental health medications to the elderly population. And I think this is happening because, you know, when our like retired population or our senior population are prescribed all these medications, people are not really watching. Like, you're busy with your life. I know you love your mom. It's great that you looked at what she was taking, but like, it's very common to just be like, oh yeah, like my 7-year-old or 8-year-old mom is on like 10 medications. Like, one, I'm sure one's for blood pressure, one's for this, one's for that. And we just sort of wipe it under the rug and don't think about it. But I don't have the statistic for this, but I do feel like with children, we know that we're prescribing more mental health medications than we ever have been before. And like I said, it's doubled recently, because we pay attention a lot, I think, to like what we're giving our kids. But as people get older, unfortunately, I think the case is we're just like,
Yeah. Anyway, I just thought that was an interesting segue. So now let's talk about the less traditional methods of treating mental health, which is what you specialize in. And we'll start from the least controversial and we'll work our way up. So the least controversial and FDA approved is ketamine assisted therapy. Now, for somebody that's never heard of that, that might sound absolutely out there. And why would somebody do something like that? And everything I've heard about ketamine is, at parties and all the bad things. So let's talk about the good things and how it helps.
yes. So ketamine increases neuroplasticity in the brain, which is something very hard to do naturally. You can do it through like a lot of breath work or thousands of hours of meditation, or some people are more enlightened. But it is very hard to increase neuroplasticity in the brain, and ketamine helps do that. Ketamine also works on the NMDA receptor in the brain, which, among many things, is responsible for memory. Not to say that if you take ketamine, you're going to lose your memories, but it will help process traumatic events because of how it interacts with us in the brain. Ketamine is also really quick acting. And a great thing about ketamine, it's the only medicine that actually reduces suicidal thoughts in just a couple hours. So for people who are suicidal, it's literally a lifesaver. If you're sitting there, in a difficult moment contemplating this, horrible decision, ketamine really can save someone's life. So it's fast acting. It has very minimal side effects. We've actually been using it as an anesthetic. Yes, there's ketamine recreationally at parties, but we've actually been using it as an anesthetic for 60 years. It's on the World Health Organization's list of essential medicines. It's probably in every hospital, every ambulance, every ER in the country. And very much like used in higher doses, even in children as an anesthetic. So we know it's safe because we've been prescribing it in larger doses as an anesthetic to even kids. So we even know like long-term that it's safe. And because it does increase neuroplasticity and helps get you to the root cause of your trauma and helps, with the memory receptors in the brain, it allows people to feel almost like I struggle with the word curative, but it feels like there are curative results. So with ketamine assisted therapy, there's an 89% reduction in mental health symptoms. Compare that to the 33% I said maybe with antidepressants. Yeah, it's a very powerful medicine. I'm happy to say more, but I'm going to pause there for a second.
So is it cost effective?
Yes. And I'm also happy to go over like, for people who don't know, like, what do I mean when I say ketamine therapy? Like, what does that look like?
Yes.
Yeah.
Please do. Let's start there. And then we can talk about, because it's not a typical, it's becoming more popular. It's because people are becoming more aware of it. But right now, it's still not something people are very familiar with.
Yes. And that's probably because like a lot of social stigma and cultural stigma and taboos, like, of, whatever we think of when we think of ketamine. But actually like used in a clinical setting, supervised with a therapist, there's very little risk of using ketamine. So what this looks like when one does ketamine assisted therapy, it's not someone just doing ketamine at home, like for fun, and then being like, maybe I feel better. It's not like a medicine you just take on your own. It starts with first a physical, like a medical and psychological assessment to make sure the person is a good candidate. That's really important. Some people might not be good candidates. For example, if a woman is breastfeeding or pregnant, probably not a great candidate for ketamine therapy at the time. Once it's determined that they're a good candidate, they'll do what's called preparation sessions. So before even getting like prescribed any ketamine, you'll talk to a therapist 1 to 3 times and set expectations for this experience. Like, what is it you're hoping to achieve? What are your goals? Why are you doing this? You'll do that kind of work with your therapist. If you're doing this with a therapist you've already worked with for years, then they already know, but you should still do some preparation specifically around the ketamine experience. And then you'll do what are called the medicine sessions, where ketamine is administered to you, again, clinically supervised setting. It can be administered through an IV, like a drip. It can be administered IM, intramuscular, so as an injection, or orally in a lozenge form. Those are the 3 forms of administration. And here, there are a couple options. Option 1 is you're administered the ketamine, you're in a clinic, you might have an eye mask and a playlist, and you don't have the therapist talking to you. Like, you're not doing talk therapy while you're in that altered state, but you'll do some talk therapy within 72 hours because you're still in a neuroplastic state. So that's one option. And the other option is actually you take the ketamine and you have the therapist sitting there beside you and you're talking while you are on this altered state. Now, this altered state lasts about 45 to 90 minutes, let's say, depending on the person and the dosage. And you're not alone, you're with someone. And you, depending on the therapist and one's own personal choices, you may choose to be doing talk therapy in that time. And then afterwards, you do what's called integration, which is integrating everything that you realized and learned and the epiphanies that were had, integrating them back into everyday life. So talking to your therapist a few more times to make these results lasting. Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I think that's very cool because I'm sure a lot of people are like, well, how does it work? How do I, you know, what would it be like? Would I be scared? Would it be, would it be weird? I'm sure that a lot of those things would be common concerns and fears that the average person who's never heard of this before would have. So I think walking us through what that process looks like is extremely helpful. So what's the average number of sessions somebody would have for it to be considered successful or to have made significant progress?
Yes, I'm going to answer that question. I'm going to say one more thing to your audience, and this may sound a little bit controversial, but that's okay. Which is there are many ketamine clinics that will not follow that protocol, the one I just outlined, and where you can walk in, see if you're a good fit, and then get ketamine administered, typically in an IV form, and just go home. And so there's no preparation, there's no therapy during, and there's no integration after. That's not called ketamine assisted therapy. That's just ketamine treatments. And people often like Google ketamine and confuse one with the other. There is evidence to show that that is helpful. So it's not that it's not helpful. However, there is greater evidence to show that the actual ketamine assisted therapy, so doing it in conjunction with therapy, leads to longer lasting change and breakthroughs. And as for your question on how many sessions, typically it really does vary from person to person. You can have a breakthrough in one session and that's all you need. And you can need 6 sessions. And some people might need a couple more beyond 6. But I would say on average, 4 to 6 is usually where most people fall.
Okay. And thank you for the clarification between just a ketamine clinic as opposed to ketamine assisted therapy. And I hope that anybody listening really took that in because that
Yes.
is a very important distinction because the therapy and the ketamine together is what makes it highly successful. Okay.
Yes.
So ketamine is FDA approved. We have ways to put it into benefit plans. We have ways, but let's talk about some of the less conventional or yeah, we'll just go with less conventional methods. So we have other psychedelics that can be used quite effectively, and I believe that the medical community is becoming more confident in looking at these other sources of treatment. So let's start with psilocybins because there is a lot of buzz about that right now, not only from mental health standpoint, but from a wellness standpoint. There's many benefits that can come from them. So let's talk about how you use that in a mental health setting.
So, um, to be clear, psilocybin, and we'll talk about the others, but none of them are FDA approved yet. So
Correct.
ketamine is the FDA approved one, and the others are not FDA approved. However, psilocybin, LSD, so psilocybin, commonly known as mushrooms for our listeners, magic mushrooms, not the mushrooms at the grocery store. LSD, also commonly known as acid, and MDMA, commonly known as Molly or ecstasy. These three drugs are three that have been given breakthrough status by the FDA. So not FDA approved, but have been given that breakthrough status. And starting then with the psilocybin or the mushrooms, um, psilocybin is a really interesting one. It's been used for millennia across all different types of ancient civilizations, and this has been pretty well documented, and used in ceremony and used as, sort of coming of age and used as a medicine. But in the medical community, what there's a lot of excitement about with psilocybin is its use case for one, treatment resistant depression. That's what it's been given the FDA breakthrough status for its effectiveness with treatment resistant depression. But I would say, you know, following suit of that, it's effective for many other things. The ones that are exciting me a lot are the evidence for psilocybin and smoking cessation, as well as eating disorders. And it can be applied for many other things, even for trauma, even for anxiety. But smoking cessation, eating disorders, and treatment resistant depression are what come to mind the most for me. And there's been really great work done at Johns Hopkins University. There's others that have looked at psilocybin, so it's not confined to Johns Hopkins, but Johns Hopkins has done a really great job at studying this actually since the 60s. They were the first to do the research on psilocybin, and then psilocybin became a scheduled substance. And then when there was, the research was revived, it was again revived at Johns Hopkins by an incredible person named Bill Richards. People want to Google him. And the results are really outstanding. Again, going back to that in treatment resistant cases. So the people who are really struggling with depression, who have tried all of the other things and it's not working, there's efficacy rates of 75% of people doing, up to 4 sessions of psilocybin assisted therapy and then no longer showing signs of depression at 1-year follow-up. There's a trial on smoking where 80% of smokers were not smoking at 1-year follow-up after their psilocybin therapy. And so just truly remarkable results with something that is non-addictive and also non-toxic. So you can't overdose from psilocybin.
So I'm curious, since you've identified a couple of the situations that it can help with, such as smoking, does it help with other like OCD symptoms? Because it seems like it's kind of in that same addictive, it's curing addictive qualities or addictive behaviors.
Yes, there's studies with psilocybin and different other substances, alcohol abuse, other substance abuse. I'm not as familiar with the studies on psilocybin and OCD. My intuition wants to tell me that that exists because of this increased neuroplasticity. It's really with the right therapist who can guide you through the experience. You can sort of work on almost anything. It's not doesn't cure everything in the world, but almost anything you want to work on mentally, you can kind of untap, which is why it's effective for so many things. It goes where you want it to go. I know that sounds a little woo-woo, but yeah, so I just don't have the stats on OCD.
No, that's okay. That's okay. It's just my logical brain said, okay, if it's working here, it seems like there's a potential for it to work in other ways that that are often difficult to treat.
Yes.
So that was why I was just curious about that. Okay, so psilocybin. So okay, let's go down the path to LSD. And what
Yes.
is that used to treat?
Okay, so LSD has been given breakthrough status for anxiety. That doesn't mean that's the only thing that it's good for, but it has been given breakthrough status for that. And also, LSD is often referred to as like the God molecule, because people have very profound spiritual experiences on LSD. Not that that's treating something, but uh, I mean, just in general, people that do psychedelics, I think it's like 6 out of 10 of people that have, there was a small study done, so the sample size was small, but it said that 6 out of 10 of people who they surveyed that did psychedelics voted it like their top 3 life experiences, right up there with like getting married and having kids. And so LSD really good for anxiety, also good in creating like profound mystical and spiritual experiences, which can be very helpful, particularly with end of life anxiety. Same with psilocybin is very good for end of life anxiety and end of life depression. Like when we have these existential questions that come to us
Yeah.
often at the end of life, these substances can help with that.
That's really interesting. Okay, last one on our list is MDMA. So let's talk about what that can be used for and what does its effectiveness look like?
Yes, so MDMA, the FDA breakthrough status has been given for PTSD, so trauma. And it kind of makes sense because for listeners who haven't experienced any of these substances, um, MDMA creates an increase in oxytocin, and definitely, the LSD and the psilocybin will create these profound visual experiences, hence like the spiritual and the God effect. Not to say that MDMA doesn't make have a spiritual effect, but it's less visual and it's more about connectedness. So you feel very in love, whether it's with yourself, with nature, with people you have relationships with. It's often used in couples therapy. So in addition to PTSD, it's like very, very, very much used in couples therapy. In fact, like in the early research, it was used a lot in couples therapy because it creates that connectedness, um, and it allows people to revisit traumatic experiences and memories with like a sense of love. So they can, they might have been scared to revisit a memory, but now they can process it and be like, okay, that happened, and it's okay. And they just come out of it loving themselves afterwards, which is sounds easy, but very difficult to do.
It's just such amazing work, and I could talk to you for hours about this particular benefit. But before we move on to the last section of the show, I just kind of want to wrap it up for people that might be listening. So, ketamine assisted therapy can be built into an employee benefit program because it is an FDA approved drug. So generally that's done inside of a self-funded plan. It can be done standalone. There's different ways of doing it. But what about the other three? Can that be provided as a benefit, or is that something individuals themselves would have to go out and seek because the employer might be liable or have some compliance issues if they endorse something that's not FDA approved?
Great question. And also, like, in order to be like completely, transparent and give all the right information, I want to be clear. Ketamine is an FDA approved drug. It is used off label, the generic form of ketamine, when used for mental health. And it's shown to be very effective for mental health. But the generic form of ketamine is so cheap, it's like $1 to $5 a dose, that it will probably never be like become FDA approved for treating mental health just because there's no money in that.
Yeah,
Sorry to put it so bluntly. However,
it's the truth. We know how the system works.
a branded form of ketamine, of course, by Johnson and Johnson, called Spravato, which is just ketamine but branded with like one twist in the left kind of molecule, which is administered in the form of a nasal spray. That is FDA approved for mental health. So you have the generic, which is used off label and totally allowed and documented. Like there's journals with 50,000 treatments for the generic form, and the the results. And then there's the branded form. And that branded version, just so you know, is about $40,000 a year. So not very
That sounds like our healthcare system.
and that's
40,000 or $12, you choose.
yeah, and that branded form is gonna hit like $1 billion in sales this year. So there's been like one thing to like listeners out there, if anyone listening is at like a large organization, you're probably already paying for ketamine. You just don't know it. It's in your claims data. You're paying for the branded version of ketamine. So you could save a lot by doing it the other way. Now to answer your question, Nancy, those other substances, no, companies cannot endorse these other substances because they are not legal in the US. They're not only not FDA approved, they are also not legal in most places. There are some places where they've been decriminalized. There are some places where they've been given the okay. So psilocybin has been given the okay in Oregon as well as Colorado. It's being implemented. So you can legally get psilocybin treatments in Oregon right now. Actually, my company does offer that as a benefit for employers if they want to add that on. That's the only place you could do it without running into compliance issues. You don't have to be an employer in Oregon, but your employees would have to be sent to Oregon. But otherwise, if people want to try MDMA or LSD or psilocybin outside of Oregon, they would have to get into a clinical trial, which often there are long wait lists, but they could be lucky. They can always search the website for clinical trials, or they can travel to a country where these medicines are available if they have the means to do so. Places like Jamaica and Costa Rica and Amsterdam, but not everyone has the means to do that.
Still, the fact that it is available in parts of the world and that it is becoming more accepted, even if it's a state by state basis, shows that we are making progress, which is a very that's a very encouraging sign. So, okay, in interest of time, we need to move on and wrap it up. So, are you ready for my 5 burning questions?
Yes, I don't know them in advance.
Good. I'm glad. That makes it even more fun. And I'm really excited for your answer for the first one because you are a world traveler. So I'm hoping it's an exciting answer. So, what is your? I don't, she's like, oh my gosh, you just set me up. What is your absolutely favorite? What's your absolute favorite food in the world, and can you cook it?
Oh God, it's not a fun answer. It's bread.
Darn it.
I know I cannot cook it, and I absolutely love bread. And I love going to bakeries all over the world and trying different types of bread. I also like the cheap store-bought sandwich bread, and I have no idea how to make bread. Did not go into that whole COVID thing of like making bread. And I think that's why I appreciate it because I can't make it.
Okay, good to know. I love bread too, and I do bake bread, and I baked bread for years. I did go into the COVID thing because I was at home and I could tend to my sourdough starter, which I actually dumped about a couple weeks ago. I'm like, I'm not doing this anymore. They make perfectly good sourdough bread at the store. Why am I dedicating hours to this? So, okay, this one I like this question, and I'm always curious to hear people's answers. What's the character trait you admire most in other people, and why?
Oh, I think, I should have thought about this. Okay, I think it would be integrity, um, because it stands out, because it encapsulates honesty, consistency, moral conviction. These qualities are pretty foundational for trust and authenticity in relationships. And I think people with integrity act according to their beliefs. They stand up for what's right, even when it's difficult to do so or when no one is watching, which is really important to me. They make choices that align with moral and ethical standards. And I think the world would be better if everyone had integrity. And yeah, it kind of creates like a beacon of dependability and like truthfulness. So yeah, integrity.
I like that answer. Okay, so now I'm going to just volley it right back at you. So, what is the character trait in yourself that you're most proud of, and why?
Ooh. Okay. Dang. Um, Resilience. I think I've faced not the most amount of challenges. Everything is relative, but face some challenges and setbacks, but generally continue to remain hopeful and optimistic about life. Even after working in like really difficult countries and seeing some pretty hard stuff firsthand, um, I have that resilience and optimism. I don't think it's just about bouncing back. I think it's also about adapting and like taking the time to learn from difficulties, while not losing heart. And so, yeah, I think I get it from my dad and my brother. I don't know if it's a genetic thing, but resilience.
Okay. She's thinking, dang, I should have read those questions at the
Yeah.
end. Okay. Well, here's a more lighthearted one. So, what's your secret talent or something people would be surprised to learn about you?
Oh, okay, yeah. I have a few because I kind of joke with my friends that I'm like a robot. Um, so so one, I can run a marathon every day and not get tired. Um, and I used to do that. And then I like got busy with work. So now I run half a marathon a day and then like one marathon a week. But like I could do 100 kilometers. Sorry, I'm Canadian for listeners. 2.5 marathons. Like I can do that distance like at one in one shot without having to like prepare. So I can just run long distances. And I can also only live off of like tea, bread, and chocolate and don't need protein or fats. I mean, there's some fat in chocolate, but I can just live off of those three foods for like probably months. And I don't sleep much. I sleep like 4 hours.
You are a robot. Okay, it has been officially confirmed. She is an android. There is something going on here because none of those sound like normal qualities. I'm just going to put it right out there. So, okay, last question. Who's the one person, famous or otherwise, living or not, that you would most love to sit down and have a conversation with and why?
Oh, I've been asked this before, so I have an answer.
All right.
And it's a weird one. It's kind of tied between Donald Trump and Kim Kardashian. Um,
Two such similar people. I can see why you would have a hard time deciding.
I mean, because I am so different from both of them. The reasons are similar. Like they are semi-controversial, um, like completely unrelatable to me, like on every spectrum, or it feels that way. And so I would love to sit down and like understand like where are their similarities. There's probably some similarities I'm not seeing from my lens. And then so you understand like what makes these people human, not to say that they're not human. And then just understanding better the differences, like because how people are portrayed in the media as complex and nuanced, and I would, yeah, love to get a better understanding on both of their personal views, and embrace the discomfort with those conversations. So I think both of those people tied.
I love that. Okay. So we are going to wrap this up. Where can people get a hold of you? How can they learn more about what your company does or the programs? So where would they start?
Um, you can always email me. I might take a week to respond to emails, but I do respond. Sherry@enthea.com. That's Sherry like the drink, and then Enthea. And then you can go on our website, which is enthea.com. You can find me on LinkedIn, which is Sherry Race. I think there's only one of me. My last name is spelled Rais. Yeah, website, LinkedIn, email. Those are the ways. And really truly for listeners who do want to learn more about these treatments, and even if you don't want to learn for your company or you don't want to learn from a benefit perspective, but you're just like someone that's struggling, or you yourself are struggling, and you want to know like where can you try ketamine therapy, for example, or learn more about psychedelics, I'm really happy to answer those questions. So feel free to reach out to me.
And she is really amazing and she will answer your questions. So if for some reason you forget all of that, feel free to reach out to me and I will connect you. So thank you, Sherry, so much. Thank you, audience, for putting up with our initial technical difficulties. That seems to be how I'm opening and closing every show anymore, is with that disclaimer. But, you know, that's the world we live in anymore. Thank you for taking the time to join us for Turkey. And for everyone else, I will see you next week.